When I was in high school, my family and I lived right next to a beautiful forest that spanned for miles and miles. It was the home of incredible wildlife, and it was one of my favorite places to take walks. For me, walking through the forest was a way of distressing. I could tune out the rest of the world and just focus on the sights and sounds of nature. Because I was young, my parents were weary about letting me walk through the forest by myself, so they told me to always make sure I had our Doberman Drake with me. Drake was huge and well-trained. He could easily take down anyone who tried to hurt me. One sunny summer afternoon, I decided it was a perfect day for a walk through the woods. I left a note for my parents on the kitchen counter, put Drake on his leash, and headed out. I took my phone with me in case of an emergency. Usually I would stick to a paved path with mile markers, so I would know exactly where I was and how far of a distance I'd walk. But that day I decided it would be fun to switch it up. I had heard that slightly to the west of the main path there were some really awesome waterfalls that I wanted to see and snap a few pictures of. The forest was pretty dense and it was hard to see what was ahead of me. I had grown up in the woods though and felt pretty confident in my sense of direction. After about 40 minutes of walking, the heat began to get to me. I stopped to give Drake some water and take a sip myself. I decided that I would walk for 10 more minutes, and if I didn't get to the waterfalls by then, I would turn back and head in the direction of home. It was now later in the afternoon, and I wanted to give myself plenty of extra time to get back before it started to get dark. I began walking and smiled as I suddenly heard rushing water in the distance. I continued on and finally came to a clearing. I was on a hill overlooking a stunning waterfall below. The water cascaded over a hill and into a shadow-looking pool below. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and snapped a few photos. I was scrolling through the snapshots to see which one was the best when I noticed something strange. I zoomed in and noticed something I hadn't picked up on when I was taking the photos. There appeared to be a dark figure in the woods not far from the clearing below me. I was too far away to tell if it was a male or female, but the figure appeared to be dragging something behind them that was concealed in a black bag. Whatever it was, it had to be heavy, because it appeared the figure was struggling to move it. I instantly picked up on a sense of danger, but also curiosity. I wanted to know what the figure was doing. I made my way down the hill, trying to be as quiet as possible. I concealed myself behind trees as much as I could, trying to get a better look at the figure. As I got closer, I could tell that it was a man, probably in his 40s or 50s. He wore a black hoodie and black pants. He seemed to be confident that there was no one around him and was completely focused on moving the black bag. It appeared that he was trying to move it to the water. I got closer and closer, doing my best to step lightly. I watched as the man pulled the bag over a rock. He had nearly reached the edge of the water now, but the rock had a sharp edge to it, and it tore a hole in the bag. To my complete shock and horror, I saw what I knew was a human hand fall out of the bag. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming as I took in the sight. I was still processing what happened when Drake let out a sharp growl. The man instantly looked up and saw us. I was frozen in fear as the man approached me, one hand in his pocket. Drake's growling intensified as the man got closer. The man asked me what I was doing out in the woods. My voice trembling, I told him I was just taking a walk. His eyes drilled into mine and my heart began to pound faster and faster. He asked me if I had seen anything. I knew he was referring to the hand that was still barely showing from inside the bag. I told him no, knowing that my lie was unconvincing. The man sighed and ran his hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. He took one long look at me and shrugged his shoulders, commenting it looked like he was going to have to clean up more than one mess today. My heart dropped to my stomach as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver handgun. He raised one arm and pointed the gun directly at me. A cold and emotionless look was in his eyes. I shut my eyes, preparing for the impact. I thought about my parents and how heartbroken they would be if I never came home. Before I could even formulate some sort of escape plan, Drake lunged forward with a great force. The lunge caused me to stumble to the ground and drop his leash. I heard a gunshot go off and I braced myself to feel a wave of pain, but nothing came. The shot had missed me. I looked up just in time to see Drake launch onto the man, pinning him to the ground. I heard snarls followed by high-pitched screams as Drake locked his mouth around the man's leg. I used this opportunity to pull myself up and raced forward to grab the gun, which was now lying a few feet away from the man. The man was large, but hardly a match for Drake, who was refusing to let up. Moving as fast as I could despite my trembling fingers, I managed to pull my phone out of my pocket and unlock it. Panic filled my chest as I saw that I only had one bar. I was in the middle of the woods. I knew there was a good chance I would have no service. Drake could only hold off the man for so long, and I needed help now. I dialed 911 and pressed call, silently praying as hard as I could that the call would get through. I had never felt more relieved in my life as I did when I heard the operator ask me what my emergency was. I did my best to explain the situation and where I was located, but it was difficult because I wasn't quite sure where myself. The operator assured me that a team had been dispatched and were on their way. The man was fighting back against Drake, using one arm to swing at his head, but Drake still seemed to be in control, teeth cutting into the man's now bloodied leg. I heard my dog let out a sharp whimper as the man's fist connected with Drake's head, and I could see his grip on the man was starting to loosen up. To my great relief, I finally heard the whir of a chopper overhead, and I began waving my arms around like a crazy person to try to get their attention. The chopper paused, and I could tell they had seen me. Using a safety harness, officers began to descend to the ground. Just as the first one touch landed, the man used his free leg to kick Drake off of him. He then began limping as fast as he could into the woods. The first 3 officers took off after the man, while the 4th stayed behind with me. I answered his questions while trying to regain my composure and comfort Drake, who appeared to be scared but injured. Eventually, more officers arrived, and I was escorted out of the woods and back to my house. I'll never forget the look on my parents' faces when I showed up at the front doorstep with a cop on either side of me. It was a long night and no one got much sleep. I lived in a small town and it didn't take long for the news of what happened to begin to spread. I remember my father disconnecting our landline because so many of our curious neighbors wanted to ask me what I experienced. It was nearly morning by the time the police were able to catch up with the suspect, who had moved surprisingly fast despite his injuries. They quickly identified the man as a wanted person from several counties over. The suspect had been stalking his ex-girlfriend, refusing to accept that she had moved on. When he found out that she had gotten a new boyfriend, he became furious and shot her in her home. He then packed her body into his pickup truck and drove several hours to dump it in the woods. He had particularly chosen this forest because he knew how vast and dense it was. He didn't think he would come across anybody else. In fact, if it wasn't for me and Drake, he probably would have gotten away with it. The body might not have been found, and there may never have been justice for the poor woman he killed. I don't give myself any credit though. If I had been in those woods myself, I would never have stood a chance against the man. He would have easily shot me so that I wouldn't be able to tell anyone what I saw. If it wasn't for Drake, he might have gotten away with burying 2 bodies that day. The man is now behind bars and will never be able to hurt anyone ever again. As for me, I will never walk in the woods without Drake ever again. He literally saved my life, and I will always be so grateful for him. What would you have done? Drop a comment and a like and subscribe. Until next time, sleep tight.